Welcome to the office hours. My name is John Fia. I chair the history department and teach American history here at Messiah College. This is episode 11 of the office hours, as our faithful filmer Megan Piet just notified me. We have a special guest here with us today. We're going to be talking about public history and graduate school in public history with Katie Garland. She's sitting here to my right, as you can see. Katie is a 2012 graduate of Messiah College. She was my research assistant for 3 years, and so we've had a long time working together, and I'm thrilled that she's now a master's student in the public history program at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, which I think is one of the best public history programs in the country. People like David Glassberg and Marla Miller teach there, and from what I hear, it's just a wonderful place to study and work. But in our office hours today, we're actually going to talk to Katie about what it's like being in a graduate school in public history, what public history is, and so forth. So welcome to the office hours, Katie.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's been maybe I think we started the office hours after you left,
yeah.
So you never even had a chance to be involved in production or anything. Nope. Which, if you know Katie and our working relationship over the years, almost everything I'm doing, she's had a hand in for the last 3 years. So this is a new endeavor. So, Katie, you're in graduate school at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. You graduated from here in 2012. What are some of the differences, just in terms of graduate school life, studying history in graduate school versus studying history as an undergraduate, at a liberal arts college like Messiah?
I think the biggest difference is the workload, because whereas in undergrad we had a book maybe every couple of weeks or an article we would read for class, now it's at least one book per class per week, and if not more. I've had to read 2 per class once, and so that's a lot different, trying to adjust to that and figure out how to read efficiently. So I'm learning how to skim well so that I can get the argument and the author's methods and where he or she fits within the historiographical conversation without reading every single word, which is a skill that I'm developing.
It's a different kind of reading, isn't it?
Yeah. It's hard, but I'm getting there. And it's a lot more discussion rather than lecture, which is a little bit more in undergrad.
How did your experience at Messiah, being a sort of liberal arts college, a sort of traditional humanities major, history, how did that prepare you or shape you or, get you ready for this experience at UMass?
Well, thanks to mostly my history classes, but also all the gen eds I took here, I learned really well how to critically think and how to not take an argument, an author's words at face value, but to think critically about them, and how to read well and how to write well, especially, and articulate my arguments. And so that's really helped me as I've now gone into grad school. And I also just learned what the conversations are going on in the field in history, and so that's been really helpful, so that it's not, I don't have no clue what's going on, but I really have a sense of where things are fitting because I know what other people have talked about.
Katie took my Colonial America class, among other classes that I taught, and I'm teaching that right now. So they're all complaining about how much reading there is, but some of them may end up in grad school, and it's not even close, I would imagine, right, to the amount of reading that they're doing in graduate school. So, Katie, you decided to go to graduate school in history, and you decided to pursue public history. Why get an MA in public history? What caused you to, or led you to that decision?
When I started at Messiah, I knew that I loved history, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with that because I didn't want to teach in a traditional setting. So after my sophomore year, I started doing internships, and I tried to intern at every possible place I could think of to get a wide variety of experiences.
Where were some of the places that you
I interviewed at a local historical society, a school archive, a state historical society, a large museum in New England, a bunch of different places. In a museum that's just starting in Gettysburg. So I tried to give myself a bit broad a variety of places as possible.
Yeah, and if I could just interject, I think if you're wanting to go into the field of public history, this is what you need to be thinking about in your undergraduate experience. Getting as much experience at as much different, many different kinds of museums and public history places as possible. Katie was on the ground floor of the new Seminary Ridge Museum in Gettysburg. She worked there last summer. The place hasn't even opened yet. She had a 10-week fellowship at historic Deerfield and a very competitive summer program. So she has really been aggressive in trying to get out there and work at some of these places. So go ahead, I cut you off.
Sure.
Public history.
Yeah, so through all of this, I developed a love of public history. I love interacting with the public and trying to get them to understand history, and maybe they didn't like it in school, but I can try to spark their interest in a different way. And because of all these experiences, I've kind of figured out what I love within public history, because I've had so many different experiences behind the scenes and in front of, and I've really discovered that I love museum education, and where I get to really interact with the public more purposefully. So.
Yeah, and I remember you were thinking along those lines too. After you finished at Deerfield, you really liked the interaction, you know, rather than the archival, or you know, where you're just kind of isolated in one place. Great. Now, public history, you know, is sort of a track, right, in graduate school. You know, some people may be watching and they're wanting to go to graduate school, and they, you know, what's the difference? You know, what's the difference between maybe pursuing an MA or graduate degree in sort of just straight history or traditional history and public history? How do your courses differ, or how's your program different?
Well, my program's kind of half more traditional academic history and then half public history. So like the other students who aren't public history, I take classes in historiography and topical courses in periods. So I had an introduction to historiography class, which kind of introduced me to conversations in the field, and then I'm now in an American historiography class, so learning about the history of how people have written about American history. But then the other half of my coursework is in more specific public history classes. So I had Intro to Public History last fall, so we talked about all sorts of places within public history that you can work, so historic preservation, museums, archives, anything you can think of. And then this semester I'm in museums and historic site interpretation, so there we're kind of delving more deeply into museums itself. So last week we read Nina Simon's Participatory Museum, which was fantastic, about how to get the public involved in a meaningful way in your institution. We did a week on museum evaluation, where we went to the Emily Dickinson House in Amherst, and we did a tour and we talked to the visitors about their experiences and what they were learning. We did a session where we actually touched actual objects, and then we wrote an object label for them and did all the research for that. So it's a lot more hands-on experience. So that when I graduate and go out into the field, I can say to an employer, look at all these things that I've done, I'm ready to work in your institution.
Right, that's great. One final question. Describe, you know, you're in your second semester of grad school. Tell us about, you know, one significant event, or what was your sort of favorite experience, whether it be in coursework or out in a museum or something like that. You know, what has been one of the highlights, or the highlights of all the highlights, sort of?
I think I have two.
Okay.
The first one would be last fall in my public history intro class. I had to do a project, and I did an oral history interview, and that was a really good experience to see what it's actually like. I have so much more respect for oral historians now, because it's way harder than it looks. The process of negotiating with the person you're interviewing, and all of the legality and issues you have to deal with that, and then the actual research for the interview and doing the interview and things. I developed a really strong appreciation for people who actually do that.
Katie has been on the other end with working with me of oral history, of transcribing, right? Not necessarily the most fun part of it, but that's good. So who was the oral history, or not who, but what kind of person did you interview?
UMass is celebrating its 150th anniversary this year, so they're trying to interview 150 people associated with the school.
Wow.
And so I interviewed the librarian who's the liaison for the sciences, and he's been there for over 40 years. And so I was talking to him about his experiences and how the library has changed, and how that change is reflected in larger UMass culture. And then the second thing that I want to talk about is we have a public history reading group that's developed this spring, and it's what I thought grad school would be like when I started grad school. So no professors attend. We just read an article, and then 6 or 7 of us sit around and talk about it for 2.5 hours or so. And it's so much fun to talk with other people who care about the same things that I care about, and to have those conversations without any professor having to mediate or anything. And it's been really fun. So
sort of like a little public history junto, as Ben Franklin would have described it, right? That's great. Well, our time is just about up. I mean, hopefully this has been useful. If you're thinking about grad school, want to know more about public history, I think I haven't talked yet to Katie about this. She's here on spring break, so we're catching her for the office hours. But we have just revised our public history program significantly here at Messiah, and we're pretty soon going to be releasing that very shortly. I think we're going to be releasing that to students to let them know what the new curriculum looks like. So this office hours is actually very fitting with some of the stuff that we're doing here at Messiah. And Katie, although she won't be able to obviously experience that new program, clearly is one of the, you know, the sort of people who've gone before to get us here in the history department excited about public history. So thanks for interviewing, Katie. It's been fun, and look forward to seeing you next time on the virtual office hours. I'm going to spend a little more time getting caught up with Katie, then I think I'm going to go home and watch some NCAA basketball. So see you next week.